Hello everyone, my name is Anuradha and I am coming to you from my channel Healing the Heart with Anuradha, and today we are going to speak about how to take care of your sourdough starter. Now, many of you have received sourdough starters from me in the mail. I have probably mailed about 50 or 55 packages, and my entire Facebook feed is just full of gorgeous pictures of successful sourdough making, and I'm so excited to be able to see the successes of other people, and I'm very excited to see more of your successes and see how you grow your repertoire, taking sourdough into dumplings and pancakes and pizza and donuts. And I know that I've been experimenting, especially during this pandemic. So let's get started. So assuming you have a jar like this. Okay, now because I've been making a lot of sourdough starter recently, specifically to send out to all of you, my jar has become pretty grungy, and I like to keep a very clean sourdough jar, but it just so happens that it's becoming crusty, and I've been putting a napkin on the top with a rubber band just to kind of, let it rise overnight, etc. And so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to transfer it into something cleaner, something that I can maintain. But what I did is I was maintaining a slightly more liquidy sourdough starter. It wasn't as hard as I would have wanted to, just because I wanted it to quickly rise. I was leaving it in a warmer place. And what happened is that this is also something that could happen to you, is that it started to emit a little bit of hydration of some water, and the water began to get a little bit of discoloration. So you can't see it right now, but there's some water in here. I'm gonna pour it in here. So what I would do is, when I see a little bit of water, even if it's not discolored, if there's just a little bit of water, I am gonna go ahead and just drain out the water, and then take the top layer out, and then make sure I get the sides as well, because that is places where maybe it's over fermented and it might be creating a little bit of mold. And then I transfer it into another bowl. And as I'm transferring it, I see that it's a really, really healthy starter on the inside. It's still very kind of spongy and light, and it smells really nice and sour. So once you get into sourdough making, you begin to really appreciate the aroma and the texture and the smell of your starter. So I generally like to use a mason jar like this. I have another little porcelain jar, which was a wonderful gift from a friend who's also into sourdough making, and that's where I keep most of my sourdough starter. I always tend to keep a second starter because, just in case, and I keep it in a mason jar. So I go ahead, once I remove the water and then I scrape off the sides, then I transfer to a clean jar, which I'm going to do right now, into a clean jar from my bowl. So it's very nice and clean like this. And then go ahead and add the recipe that I like to use for feeding my starter is always pretty much the same. It's a 1/2 cup of flour to a 1/4 cup of water. And this is just one of those foolproof kind of starting feed your starter recipes. So that was a 1/2 cup and a 1/4 cup of water. Yeah. Of course, my favorite spatula. If you've been watching my shows, you know that I love using a spatula. And then I just kind of, press it in there. Ideal scenario would have been to just kind of mix it in the bowl, but go ahead and just kind of let it get nicely emulsified over here, nicely mixed. And then I just kind of clean off my starter with a spoon. So then I have a really nice healthy starter over here, and I'm going to go ahead and let this ferment and culture for a few hours or overnight for that matter. I've been pretty much putting it into the oven with the light on. The light on just creates a little bit of a warmer environment. It's not very hot like an Instant Pot, but it just creates a little hint of warmth in your oven. And I find that temperature to be really good when I want to refresh my starter. Now, if I've developed a little bit of water and kind of a gray film on my sourdough starter, what I will do if I have the time is give it a second feed. So tomorrow morning or in a few hours when it's bubbled up nicely, when it's kind of, doubled in size, I will remove half of it and then feed it with a half a cup of flour and a quarter cup of water, and then let that rise. And once it's risen and it looks really healthy and it's smelling really sour, I will go ahead and put that into my fridge until I'm ready for my next baking session. Now, that is if you have a little bit of water, some discolored water, or if there's no water, sometimes it might be that it just develops a little gray or maybe like an off-white kind of furry feeling. All you have to do is just bring out your spatula, bring out a spoon. The reason I like to use a spatula is that it gets into the corners as well. I can kind of go and like really slice in or splice in on the sides and get most of it out. I take just only the littlest bit out, and then once I remove that first layer, everything looks really beautiful. But I try to then transfer it into another jar so that I know that I'm creating a really nice fresh environment. Now, the third thing that could happen is you could forget about your starter. And this is why I always recommend place your starter somewhere in your fridge that you can be reminded about it. Now, my traditional schedule is that I may not make sourdough bread for a long time. Weeks might go by and I don't make any sourdough bread. And that's, just kind of the way my life is going. But you might be a single person, and you might make sourdough bread every 3 or 4 months for that matter, and you have your sourdough starter just sitting in your fridge. Now, this happened to me once. I just forgot about my starter. I went away for a couple months. I came back, and my sourdough starter was hard as rock, and I was completely devastated. So what I started to do was I started to just break into it with a flat-edged knife, and I added water to it. And I let it sit with some water for several hours, broke into it some more, added some more water until I was able to kind of break the almost frozen kind of, experience that my poor little starter had in the fridge. And then once it had kind of become a little bit soft, I went ahead and just added, like I said, I added flour, my regular quarter cup of water to a half a cup of flour, and I let it just do its thing. Except that what I did with something like that was I fed it a second time, and then I fed it a third time. By the third time, it was perfectly fine. By the second time, it was also rising, but I just wanted to make sure that I had a really great, healthy starter. So that is when you've kept it in the fridge for a long time and you're not really making sourdough. Now, this could happen for just about anyone. If you're not making sourdough starter, I really, really believe in the integrity of my starter. It does not come from generations and generations to be, a whingy, whiny starter. It's a really strong, incredible starter, and I've never had a problem with it. So, and maybe the last thing that could happen with your starter is that it develops some kind of, really funky mold. Now, when that happens, I would try to dish the whole thing out of the jar, turn it over, and try to scrape some of the nice sourdough that maybe be at the very bottom of the jar. And from that, I could even make a starter from 1 teaspoon of sourdough starter. If I'm able to salvage just a teaspoon of sourdough starter, I can build that into just about anything. It's just going to take patience. It might take the entire night to grow. It might take the entire night and day to grow, but you just have to have a lot of faith and give it a lot of time. Sourdough means just a lot of time, a lot of patience. And that's where the, therapeutic and really healing benefits come into sourdough is the amount of time it takes and the amount of patience is required, because all of that magic is happening in, you know, in that particular dough. And then the last tip I would say is that if you are going away, one thing you could do is to divide your starter. Feed your starter and then divide it into 2 jars. I always, when I'm going away, I like to have 2 jars of starter in my fridge, just in case. I always have this feeling of just in case. And I have 1,000 scenarios in my head, but if I can just make sure that I have 2 starters, and as I'm experimenting with one to try to revive it, I always have a second one just in case, that I can fall back on. And the last thing that you can do, which I almost never do, is when you're going away, have 2 bottles of starter in your fridge and then give a little bit of starter to a really good friend. And, text them every 2 or 3 weeks and tell them, please feed my baby. Feed my baby with a cup of flour, a 1/4 cup of water. Give it a mix, leave it out. If it has bubbles, go ahead and put it back into the fridge. Text them 2 weeks later, ask them to take care of it. So that is the last tip that I can give to you. Apart from that, the culture should remain really healthy. And if your culture goes bad for some reason, I have opened up a store on eBay. You can find the same Dinkel or Spell starter that I've been distributing to my friends. It's on Healing the Heart with Anuradha on an eBay store. And I will go ahead and put a link at the bottom in case you need to purchase more starter. So with that, I wish you the very best of luck with taking care of your starter. If you take care of your starter really, really well, you will never need to buy yeast again. You could make so many things with sourdough. Just today, I made a soup, a dumpling soup, and I did it with sourdough. So I seasoned the flour with a lot of spices, added my sourdough starter to it, let it do its thing for several hours, and then made my soup, and then made these gorgeous little dumplings, threw that in, let it simmer for about 15 minutes, and I have sourdough dumpling soup. So I know that I'm having this gorgeous, wonderful, nutritious soup, but I'm having it with dumplings that are really, really healthy for me. So with that, again, I wish you well on your sourdough making journey, and here's to keeping your sourdough starter really, really healthy. So take care, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and share this, and I look forward to sharing many more recipes, many more sourdough recipes with you. So take care, everyone. Thank you so much.